Obviously, most people know that one of the most powerful things to drive out demons is holy water. And the new rite of blessing actually blesses the water, so it does have a certain efficacy. But in the old rite, the salt is exercised and blessed, the oil water is exercised and blessed, and the two are mixed. And that actually means that it brings up a particular interesting issue that has to be addressed, and that is, there's a Latin phrase which is oratio genuit quod significat, which means prayer begets what it signifies. It's actually based on the notion of lex generis quod significat, that the law begets what it signifies. So if you enact a law, people start behaving that way. Well, it's the same thing in prayer in a certain sense. Prayer begets what it signifies. So if you ask for specific things, you get specific things, and demons know this. And it's like a Simon Says game. So, sometimes you can tell them stop X, and they're really doing Y, even though it might look like X. They just keep doing it. So the point being is that it does get exactly what it signifies. So when water is exercised, it actually has a greater efficacy to be able to drive them out. Okay, so usually what I tell people is, I tell priests, you start doing it in the old rite, you can use it in the old rite, you don't need any further permissions because of the fact that USCCB has conceded that they can use the old ritual to do the blessing, so I just have to start using it then. And especially after Summorum Pontificum and all that, it's kind of conceded that all the old books are usable. So I usually tell the priest to use them. So if you can get it blessed in the old rite, it'll actually have a greater efficacy. And this is based upon the nature of prayer. This does not mean, again, that the new rite of holy water is inefficacious. It's just not as efficacious. So if you, in the lack of the old rite of holy water, at least get some blessed holy water. Holy water may be used to spread around everywhere in houses, on people, and on things. It may also be consumed by those who are having problems. So I tell people, get hordes of it made and just, drink a little bit each day. Then there's what's called, and you can sprinkle around on everything. And you should have the little holy water pots in your house where people can use it, your kids, and you can use it regularly, so that it's regularly available. Epiphany water is even more efficacious because of the fact that there's a twofold exorcism done on the vigil of the Epiphany. So if you can get a hold of some of that, usually when it's made, priests will make gallons of it because of the fact that way when people need it in the future, then you just put it in the holy water font and people actually have it. And priests in since the blessing can be conceded to be used by any priest, you can even use it even if he says the new rite all the time. You can use this old book of blessings. It's not called the old book of blessings, it's actually the Roman ritual. Sometimes what exorcists will do is just something I usually do, but I haven't done it since I got here because I couldn't take any fluids on the plane. You got that whole thing going on. So, but usually what exorcists will actually do is take a little bit of holy oil and add it to the holy water to boost the efficacy of it. And sometimes they've found that helps. Exercise salt is also efficacious in spreading around in locations as well as consuming. As a general rule, anytime I go anywhere and I'm in place for any length of time, I'm eating salt, I exercise all the salt in the building. There was one case where I actually did that in one building, and one of the people in the building immediately became ill from eating the food. So I'm like, okay, you got a problem, bud, come on over here, So it's one of those kinds of things. So it's a good diagnostic tool, But anyway, the point being is that it's good to have it in the house and consume it. Have all your salt blessed. Have it all blessed. Then there's relics of saints, particularly those of the saints of the day, whether it's the new rite calendar, the old rite calendar, or it's the Eastern rite calendar, whatever calendar it is, it just drives them absolutely nuts about the particular saint. Now, sometimes you'll get a hold of a demon that's possessing somebody or influencing somebody that has, in fact, possessed someone else in the past. And they have been driven out by a particular saint or driven out by someone on a particular feast day of a saint, and so the demons are particularly sensitive to that particular saint. So sometimes they'll come across that in the exorcisms. Then there's also, so if you have relics of saints, those can be very powerful in providing protection and warding off demons. There is the stone. St. Michael appeared in Barcelona, Italy 5 times, and it's a wonderful story. You can go on the internet and get the information. They have an official website. Trying to navigate that thing is like anything else Italian. You can't find anything. But I say I haven't lived in Italy for 2 years. But the cave has these little stones, and when St. Michael appeared, he said he wants people to take stones from the cave because he's chosen this cave and it's sacred to him. And basically what that means is that God sanctified the cave, and so people can take these little stones. I've had phenomenal success. One woman who was possessed, it only took 3 times to liberate her, and the 3rd time I gave it to her, you didn't hear it, but there was this popping sensation about halfway through the ritual, and I sensed, and then I could see that she was reacting at the same time. Afterwards, she didn't have any problems, and that was the first time I'd actually used one, so I was quite contented. Since then, I've used it all the time, but it's also something good to carry on yourself. You can write them, send in a donation. Usually I tell people send them $50 and ask them for a stone, and they'll usually send it in a small reliquary, or they'll send you one with more than one, or however the case is. But they're good to carry with you and to use. Then there's the relics of the Passion. If you have a relic of the true cross, that's pretty good. In the past, most priests, the only ones who ever had that, although it kind of, unless it was for public veneration, a particular vocation, which is very rare, if a priest had it, it was a sign that it was usually given to him by a bishop because he was an exorcist, and because it's an extremely powerful relic. And that brings up a particular point. There are some things that work with some demons and some things that don't work with them at all. So you have to kind of find what the thing is that works on them and just beat them with it. Then there's the Agnus Dei, which is the parts of the Paschal candle blessed in Rome. That's also quite useful to carry with you and that type of thing. We've already talked a little bit about private and solemn exorcisms, which I'll drive them out and exhume Christian on. There's a thing called the spiritual contract. Now, usually people hear of like demonic contracts and things of that sort. I sold my soul to the devil. There's that line, I don't know if you guys ever watched Oh Brother Art Thou, and the guy gets in and says, yeah, I sold my soul to the devil. And you did? He says, yeah, I wasn't using it. I was just like, Anyway, the point is that whatever the demons do mirrors what is done. So the sacramentals, which the church teaches people to help them to lead a good Christian life, the demons do the opposite by using amulets and various other superstitious items. But there's always this mirroring that goes on, and one of the things that we have is a spiritual contract, which virtually nobody knows about, and is an unfortunate thing because it can really improve your spiritual life. And what a spiritual contract is it's a petition set up on the side of the individual to God, asking God, whenever I do this particular action, may this prayer be said, or may this thing be remembered. And so it's basically, so the person, all you have to do is kneel down and say, God, each time I make the sign of the cross, may the binding prayer against impurity, like if you're struggling with impurity, be remembered or said for me. And so each time you would say it will have the effect, not exactly the same effect as saying the binding prayer, but it'll have the same kind of effect as having a binding prayer. Demons react quite a bit to this if you set up a spiritual contract. I tell people, set up spiritual contracts for every type of pious practice. And you can even set it up for breathing. I tell people don't do that. Really stick with stuff that's actually religious so that it's based on a proper act of devotion. So, which is like each time you make the sign of the cross, may the binding prayer be said over my children that might be suffering from problems. Or may the prayer to St. Michael, be said each time I genuflect and things of that sort. So you can actually get these, set up these spiritual contracts. And it's very similar to, husbands and wives have this kind of, sometimes they usually get to a certain stage in the marriage where they can kind of communicate without saying anything. They just look at each other and they know what it means, and, for good and ill. But the point is that it's very similar to that whenever the person does it, even if it's unreflected, as long as you make that habitual intention, whenever I do X, then each time the person does it, even if he's not thinking about it, he gets the effect of that particular prayer. Now, the demons have the opposite type of thing of demonic contract, and that's usually to empower them, but that's because it's mirrored. But doing spiritual contracts can be very beneficial to people, even in their own spiritual lives. Then there's, of course, devotion to Our Lady. Our Lady, by virtue of being Queen of Heaven and Earth, has perfect coercive power over demons. But she does not exercise it perfectly in the sense of exercising it to its fullest extent all the time, because then she'd be driving them all out all over the place. because her will is perfectly subordinated to God's, and so she only does it to the degree that God so chooses. And so having a strong devotion to her, though, can be very useful because of the fact that she can carry them out. St. Michael, obviously, since he's, the head of the host of heaven that fights the battle. Guardian angel, most people don't develop a basic relationship with their guardian angel at all, even though he's constantly taking care of them. He's constantly vigilant. A lot of times they say, well, my guardian angel's not doing anything. Well, yeah, he's constantly keeping things at bay, it's just that you don't experience it. Whereas people really should be praying to their guardian angel, and the reason you pray to him regularly in the saints of Our Lady, the St. Michael, and the other saints is because you become more subordinated to them, and then this divine authority structure kicks into place, and you enjoy the effects of their protection. This is one of the reasons why you do it regularly with your guardian angel. Then there's St. Joseph. He's particularly powerful in driving out demons, especially for fathers. One's particular patrons. So, St. Chad, for example, in my case, or St. Thomas Aquinas, I took him as my confirmation saint. It's kind of a funny story. The bishop, sometimes you got to kind of lighten this stuff up a little bit. The bishop, when I read up for confirmation, because I was the shortest one, I was the first kid up there, right? And you have a little card. And the priest takes it and he says, Thomas Aquinas. The bishop just breaks out laughing. As a kid, I don't understand that. At that time, I didn't understand the political context of what that really meant. So I looked up and I said, did I do something wrong? He says, no. So he confirms it right. Later, I went and asked him. I said, well, what happened? He said, the bishop said he had been arguing with the priest who took the card for 2 hours about St. Thomas Aquinas, because this person was trying to say they should just take him off the books, nobody pays any attention to him anymore whatsoever, and then the first kid comes up, Thomas Aquinas. But anyway, your confirmation saints, in other words, your confirmation saints, the patron saints of the kids, your names, your family, this is another thing that just absolutely drives me into orbit. And that is when parents will name their kids after, plug-in. Hey, plug-in, come on in over here, or Sterling. There's no Saint Sterling. The reason you name, and quite frankly, I think it's a sin against charity not to name your kid after a saint, because you don't provide him extra protection that he would get by putting him under the patronage of a saint. It's just not right. But one time, I had to go do an emergency baptism in a hospital, and I get up there, and the kid, it's one of those things where people could die right away or could live to be 12, but in either case it was never going to reach the use of reason because it had a particular kind of brain illness. And so it had just been born. And the parents wanted the child baptized. I said, okay. I said, so what's the daughter's name? They said, Lena. Lena? That's a witch's name. Oh yeah, it's on some TV show. We just like the names we named again. Witch. So I said, I'm not baptizing the kids. You pick a saint's name. What would you like? Mary. I said, that's good enough. But anyway, some of the way that people name their children is just unconscionable. And they should be trying to get the kids' patrons to protect them. That also brings up the guardian angels of your wife or your husband or your children. I think you should be praying to them regularly to protect them and that type of thing. Or even your boss and things like that. Keep him from beating up on me all the time and chewing me up. Okay. Praying to the saint of the day, when the saints have watched, get calendar, watch the feast. When the saints come up, watch that and pray to those particular saints of the day. The last thing I'm going to mention, of course, there's all sorts of different things that sometimes come up in particular peoples. Like if the demons are afflicting them with pride, well then say the litany of humility. And there's different prayers and different things that people can do to deal with particular kinds of demons. These are just general things that you can do. But one of it is, as I mentioned, throwing the Sacred Heart and the Immaculate Heart in your home, because then that sets up this authority structure within the home, and so you enjoy certain effects of the enthronement. As a result of it. So those are some of the basic things that people can do in order to kind of keep the demons from affecting them or influencing them. If they are influenced, to kind of drive them back and keep them at bay and that type of thing. Okay. We have a little bit of time, so what I'm going to do is there were some cards that were put in. Unless it's something that I really want to discuss here, if you put your email address on, what I'm going to do is just email you the answer later. It might take a little while. Because of the writing that I've done and the fact that I used to teach and the fact that I've done I'm a bit overloaded on a social level. I spend between 4,000 and 6,000 minutes a month on a cell phone, and I get 400 to 600 emails a month. So I just don't. I don't have a lot of time. I will get to it, I promise, if I don't actually answer it in specific cases. One of the questions is malignant narcissism or constant contrary view. Yes, that is a sign of the demonic. What are they? Malignant narcissism is the person who's always thinking about themselves, but in bad ways. Constant contrarian view, they're always a contrarian spirit. That's almost always a sign of some type of diabolic spirit. And you can bind it. You can bind those. That's pretty effective in binding those, actually. My nephew is schizophrenic and has said he is possessed. Is it possible it is problems with demons? In most cases of schizophrenia, unless it's biologically based, that can happen. Let me put it this way. In every case that they've been labeled as schizophrenic that I've come across that is not biologically based, it's demonic. And we can get fairly quickly, actually. Because usually what happens is schizophrenia is almost always a form of possession. So what you can do is that after you do a few sessions with them, you can usually get people that they'll do certain regimens of prayer and things like that. You can get them to the point where they can function and actually get out of the mental institution, which brings up a very interesting point. It was confirmed by another exorcist that I know of just recently because he started doing it in a mental institution. But in the late 1800s, it was a priest who was assigned to a mental institution in Italy as the chaplain. And so he got to looking around and said, I think a lot of these people are possessed. So he started exorcising everybody there. In 3 weeks, 80% of the people went home. Wow. They cleaned their own house. Wow. I don't know if the investors were particularly happy with that. Okay. That's a question I'll ask later. What is the proper age for men and women to date when you're ready to get married? Just answer very quickly when you're ready to get married.
45.
Well, actually, I have a very different view of that. I think the way our educational system is set up in this country doesn't serve nature well. Quite frankly, I think that we should go back to what was somewhat like in the Middle Ages, in the sense that when you reached 8th grade, you either went to college or you learned a trade. This business of sitting in high school for 4 years, not learning a thing, and being an annoyance to everybody has got to come to an end. Because what happens is they get to 18 years of age, they can't support themselves, they can't support a wife, and then they go to college, which should have been really done in high school, because that's what it's all been pushed back. So quite frankly, if they went to college and there was no hanky-panky, you're going to study, you're really going to do your work, or you're going to learn a trade and get to the point where by the time you're 18 or 19 years of age, you can get married. Why is that important? Because nature is ready for women to start having children about 16, 17, 18, depending on the woman, and men a little bit older for maturation purposes. But the point is that that's when nature's ready. We push it off until they're 27, 28, 29, 30 years of age, and then we wonder why there's so much fornication. And it's also not good either, because when people do get married, it takes years for the point. They're usually in hock for years because of the fact that they want to live the lifestyle they came from right off the bat. Whereas if we set them up where they could actually get their college degree by the time they're 18, and maybe later if they were getting advanced degrees, then at least they would be prepared to support a family and they could actually get married at an early age. But the point is that the finality of dating, the very nature of dating, the action is ordered towards marriage. Well, it's contraceptive in a sense to go out dating with no intention of getting married. So I just tell people, look, if you're not ready to get married, you're not ready to date. And the second thing is something that's very important, and this usually goes off like a bomb, is if you're not ready to have children, you're not ready to get married. So, because that's the nature of what marriage is for. My child was conceived while I knew my husband didn't want a child. I was angry with him, so instead of telling him I was fertile, I said nothing. I'm concerned for the welfare of the resulting child. The general principle is this: if you don't see any problems, there's usually not one. I mean, it's pretty much what you see is what you get. With a few exceptions, sometimes they can be hidden, but there's always some manifestation. So if you're not having any difficulties with the child, don't worry about it. If you are, if it's kind of like misbehaves a lot and unnaturally, then have the priest do a blessing over them and see if the child kind of calms down a little bit, or feed the kid the water and oil and see if that helps. If it does, then take it to a priest and get the blessing. By using artificial birth control or obtaining a vasectomy, do individuals open themselves up to demonic possession? The answer is yes. Same thing with having your tubes tied and things of that sort. It does, yes. By a parent saying damning to a child, are they opening the child up to demonic possession? The answer is yes. I know a child that happened to. Okay. When a spouse knows there is a generational diabolical force in the other, how do you convince the spouse to seek help? Well, the first thing you have to do is pray that they receive the grace to be disposed to actually to seek the help. Sometimes, usually if you pray for them for a while and you see some binding prayers, they'll get periods of lucidity about the thing, and you can just, at that moment, switch. Don't you think you kind of have a problem with that? Yes. Well, maybe you should go see Father about it, and then you tell Father, give him the blessing. That's a good thing. So that's one of the things I very often will recommend. Why is loss of lamp not as promulgated as Fatima? No, I'm not answering that one. Okay. Why is it not promulgated as much as Fatima? I'm not sure. I think part of it is because people did. Fatima is more recent, is probably the real reason that people pay probably more attention to it. At least that would be my take on it. Maybe a few other reasons too. What has been written about the possible connection of the homosexual abuse by priests to children and the influence of direct actions of enemies of the church, specifically Freemasonry? Well, part of that also has to do with the fact that the communists, this is something that's verifiable. I mean, it's right in public record. Miss Dodd was the one who told us that basically that the communists actually tried to infiltrate the church by putting 1,000 seminarians into the seminaries to influence the church eventually, and they said they were more experienced beyond their wildest dreams. The same thing with Freemasonry. The problem, and I'm sure that there is probably some type of connection. I mean, Freemasonry is a disordered form of worship. In fact, it's demonic ultimately. And so, like I said, you're going to end up with all these problems. And usually once the contraceptive mentality takes over, in fact, that's a historical fact, there's not a single culture ever, historically, that didn't become contraceptive that didn't also have a drastic rise in homosexuality at the same time. So this is something which there is a connection. I mean, there's a certain logic. I don't want to go into it all, but it's just one of those things that when we're not worshiping rightly and priests aren't doing what they're supposed to do, you're going to end up with these kinds of problems. The other thing is, too, is that, if a person has disorders, part of the problem is that very often priests make the Mass about themselves. And people kind of hang going to the Mass upon the personality of the priest, and that's problematic. Well, if you're going to make it about themselves, and people perceive that, then what you're going to attract into the seminary is homosexuals. Because why? They're narcissistic. They're kind of hung up on themselves. A vast majority of them, by vast I mean like 99% of them. And so what happens is that it's a respectable thing to enter into. They don't have to get the stigma of not getting married. They're around buddies. They think they're going to be around other men with this like mind. And then they get to do this ritual each week, which everybody gets to look at them. Yes, God enjoys beating up on demons and humiliating them. If it is correct to say enjoy, because if God loves all His creation, then would it not cause Him pain to beat and humiliate and in a sense sadistic? Not really. You have to look at it from this perspective. If you're a virtuous parent, then using moderated corporal punishment, I'm sorry, but Dr. Spock and the modern culture don't trump Scripture. Spare the rod, spoil the child. It's right in the Old Testament. God wrote it. That's it. That's the end of the discussion as far as I'm concerned. Doesn't mean to beat your kid either, though. But the moral of the story is, what is the moral of the story? Oh, if the parents do it in a moderated way, and they know that it's correcting the children, and it comes not from their own anger, but from a desire to do what's good for the kid, and then they notice the kid becomes better as a result of it, there's actually a certain joy they take in correcting the kid, if they're rightly ordered. Well, it's the same thing with God. God looks at them and says the just thing for you is to be punished, and so He punishes them. And so there's a delight in God in being just. Not in the fact that they are suffering, but in the fact that the suffering is due to them as a matter of justice. So He takes delight in His own justice, not in the actual punishment itself. Can angels take the Eucharist hook and give communion to lay people? Yes. It has happened on a few very, very rare occasions. What can parents do if their child, 19 years old, may not have been given an exorcism as an infant? That's always a big question. People come to me, the kid's acting up, and they'll say, well, I got my kid baptized in the rite, they didn't use that. Now, you can do the exorcism in the new rite. I'm not having it in the new rite at all. I'm just saying if they would do it, we don't have these problems. But they'll say, well, he's baptized in the rite, the priest dispensed with it. Is there anything we can do? Can you supply the rites from the old rite? And the answer is no, you can't. There's been one case where I saw a dispensation that was given, but it's because that guy was possessed, at least in my estimation, he was possessed. And it was given only in that case, but it's not something that can really be done on that side. However, that's where the binding prayers, Zoom Christianorum, all these things can begin to provide protection for him, getting him out. If he's 18 years of age, he's got a decent spiritual life, have him start saying it. The infant child's life was in danger, so the mother gave baptismal blessing, and the priest did a rite. He said, well, I guess we don't really have to do anything. Actually, there is the supplying of rites, which he has an obligation to do. And if it hasn't been supplied, then you can go have it supplied in the old rite if you like. What happens to your soul if you die in a demonic possession? Depends on its state. If it's in the state of grace, which can happen, it goes to heaven. If it's not, it goes to hell. So they only have possession of your body, not your soul. So, and they can't touch your soul. So if you are in the state of grace, it doesn't affect it. Possession of the smallest. I would presume that means by the children or that type of thing. And Morph makes the observation, the head exorcist makes the observation, as you deal with it, you don't see that stuff as much in our culture unless it's generational than you do in other cultures where there's a lot of superstitious practices. But Morph talks about how very often the women, if they don't like a particular woman, they'll hex the kid that she's carrying, and then the kid ends up with all these malformations and that type of thing. This is one of the reasons why I'll ask women, oh yeah, I'm pregnant. How long have you been pregnant? It's 5 months. Have you got the blessing for pregnancy? No. Okay, get in here. Because it actually asks for God to assign an angel to protect the child and to guide its birth. And recently, there was a woman, she was 8 months pregnant, and I gave her the blessing. The kid was born, came out of the womb with the cord completely around its neck. They were absolutely flabbergasted that it didn't die in the process. And we're convinced it had to do with the blessing. But the point is that they can become possessed in the womb. And this is one of the reasons our church always did the exorcisms, and also to break generational spirits. But it can happen to children who are quite young. It can even happen to children who they're even exercised at birth and that sort of thing. But anyway, you just have to do your part to make sure that they're properly exercised. Are Catholics responsible for other teachings of the Church that our parish priests or local dioceses may not emphasize? Yes. It's called the sin of negligence. Even if your parish priest doesn't tell you everything, because the pulpit is a limited thing. You can't tell everybody everything. There needs to know from the pulpit. It's just there's not enough time for it. So each Catholic has, that's why you have catechism, adult CCD, and a variety of different educational things. But the Catholics should each have a good catechism, have gone through it thoroughly, and other teachings. And the Church says we have an obligation to continue educating ourselves according to our state in life. That means as a priest, he has to continue educating himself, and so with lay people, according to their state. I usually recommend the Catechism by Spirago because it's so thorough. It's Catechism Explained, put out by 10. The New Catechism has, it's written in theological language, so I usually don't recommend it to lay people. I tell them, you're probably better off getting something that's a little more accessible. So that's usually the one I recommend. You just go through it slowly and give you quite a bit of knowledge. Can we pick and choose which teachings to follow and get to heaven? Well, here's the issue. You can't get to heaven without having rectitude of the will. What's rectitude of the will? Love of God and submission to God. That rectitude of the will, you can't have rectitude of the will, it's a blind faculty, without without the proper knowledge. So that means that without rectitude of the will, you have to have faith. You have to have the right kind of faith. Which is why St. Thomas says that even for baptism of desire, you actually have to have at least some infused faith, and that means a person has to have at least knowledge of the Trinity and the Incarnation. That's a debated point. But the point is that you have to have right faith. Now, what I'm about to say has to be understood in an exact way. Nobody in heaven is a non-Catholic. Doesn't mean that people who aren't Catholic in this life don't get into heaven. It just means by the time they get there, it gets straightened out in the process. So the point being is that either at their final judgment in purgatory, that's all straightened out. So, but just trying to keep that in mind. The point being is that if you're a Catholic and you knowingly reject something of the Catholic faith, as Christ says, without faith you cannot be saved. And if you have a single act of heresy corrupts the virtue of faith, and it's the virtue of faith in that in the state of grace that gets you into heaven. So that's just to kind of keep in mind. Can someone be a Freemason and not realize it's coils? Do they usually know of it or just pass it off as something else to the general public? It depends on what level you're at. If you're at the higher levels, I think they pretty much know, but it's an incremental thing. 132 degrees. It takes a while to get through, and it's a slow incremental thing. They start out, it seems innocuous and kind of cool. You're part of this old boys club, and it just slowly gets you to the point where, you're stepping on a crucifix and worshiping Satan at the end. So it's a gradual thing. So to answer your question, some do, some realize it, or it's evil, some realize it, some don't. Contraception issue again. What if the male has a vasectomy? Can that mean that he can be obsessed with a demon? If he is, then what can his wife do if the husband won't reverse it? He doesn't have to reverse it. First thing he's going to do is a confession and get that straightened out. The second thing is that he should, if there is something that's attached to himself, question him as a result of that, well then he should do what's necessary to get rid of it. I mean, if there's some type of demonic obsession or influence as a result of it, he should go to a priest and receive the blessing and get it straightened out and take those means necessary. Not everybody who has vasectomy becomes, obsessed or possessed, and definitely not possessed. It's very rare you see that kind of connection. I've never even seen it. But there's also the real problem with contraception, in addition to being part of it, the male, it is part of the mental. One of the things that's just somewhat common is when women use contraception and then, as a result, especially IUDs and things of that sort, you'll actually see that afterwards, if they conceive a kid, the kid gets affected because if the demons get in and take some type of possession or they get influence over a woman in that particular manner, it's very odd. It almost always becomes a generational spirit where it's passed to the kid, and that's the thing that you have to be really careful with. He doesn't have to have it reversed. Even when he comes to confession, the church has said that the priest cannot require him to have it reversed in order to receive absolution. You can encourage it, but it's not required. But you're on a slippery slope now. Because now that your marital acts are infecund, it's very easy to allow yourself to take delight in the contraceptive side of it. And so that's one of the things that people have to be very careful with on that. What about laying on of hands in church, such as with the Congregation over RCIA candidates? Laying on the hands by other people, I think that's not a good idea personally. I think if the priests do it, that's a good idea. The other one, I don't see how it's actually rooted in any tradition or any Catholic theology that I'm aware of and that I've read and researched, although I'm open to correction. Evangelization, what works in our modern age? I desire all souls to be saved. I feel desperate with Catholic family members, very fearful for friends and family. What can should we do? Prayer and fasting, but you can also do your part by always defending the faith in the particular location that you're in. And also you can pray for people, support the missions, good missions, that type of thing. You can also, there's a variety of different things that you can actually do. The best thing that you can do is lead a good, holy Catholic life. Recently, I read someone make the observation, if you're yelling at somebody, they can't hear you. It's too loud, they can't hear you. And that's one of the real problems. You get into arguments with people that's already at the stage where you're just as counterproductive, so the best thing is shut up. The better thing to do is to pray and dispose them. But if they are open to it, then you have obligations, out of charity at least, to do something to help them. Was Joseph Smith under demonic possession, or was he consciously trying to deceive people? I would probably be inclined to say, if you actually read the history of what supposedly happened, that this angel appeared, I would probably say it was demonic in some way. Either, I suspect, I mean, there was this rumor that apparently there was some communication or a letter that was floated by one of the very high members of the Mormon religion. They basically said that Joseph Smith just started because he wanted money and women. And I don't know if that's true or not. The whole thing about, you know, the finding of the tablets and all that kind of thing, I think is entirely suspect, obviously. I'm too tempted to make comments about how his wives look, so I'll just leave it at that. So, anyway, okay. Are there any other questions? If we have do we have any time? Yes.
The question is about our Protestant brothers, also beyond that, Muslims, Jews, Hindus, so forth and so on. The church, my understanding is the church has always taught that if these individuals truly believe and are seeking the truth, that God understands that and will accept them accordingly. Am I wrong in my church teaching on that?
Well, do you want the stuff that's bannered around today, or do you want what the church has always taught?
I want to know what the church teaches.
Okay. This is the moral of the story. It's a formally defined doctrine that outside the church you cannot be saved. Period. But what the church does teach is that there are some people, when you're baptized, if it's a valid baptism, you're infused with Catholic faith. So you're Catholic, whether you're done by a Protestant minister or not, it's still a Catholic baptism ultimately, as far as the effects. So what this means is that as long as you don't commit a mortal sin, as long as a Protestant doesn't commit a mortal sin, or as long as he doesn't corrupt his virtue of faith by committing a formal act of heresy, and if he dies, he goes to heaven. Because of the fact that his faith was ultimately still Catholic, even though he might not fully understood it. By faith, I mean this virtue that was still in him if he hadn't committed formal heresy. If he does commit formal heresy and commits a mortal sin, then he's got to repudiate the heresy, or he's got to commit a perfect act of contrition. He's got to become Catholic. By Catholic, I mean into the visible part of the church. Now, that means that as Pius IX condemned the proposition that we can have reasonable hope in the salvation of non-Catholics. Now, you have to understand exactly that. By the way, that's an absolutely literal translation. You have to understand why it's literal. It doesn't mean that someone outside the church can't be saved. By outside the church, I mean visible structure. They are part of the church by virtue of the fact that they're in the state of grace, because the communion of the saints is part of the Catholic Church, and if you're in the state of grace, you're part of the communion of saints. So it's in. That's why one of the best books written on ecclesiology was written by Cardinal Biot in the late 1800s, where he said you're either part of the church by baptism or by grace. So even somebody who has baptism and desires someplace is part of the Catholic Church by virtue of their grace. It means that no other religion, period, can save. None, save the Catholic Church alone. It just means if a Protestant is saved, he's saved by means of the Catholic Church. So some get to heaven, some don't. But any that do, it's not by virtue of their own religion, because their religion is false. Falsity doesn't get you into heaven. Only truth does. God is truth. If you're going to turn yourself to truth, well, you got to be truth. God doesn't tolerate imperfection in His presence. So that means then that you have to have Catholic faith before you can enter into heaven, and that's why I said it gets straightened out, or it's already present in them, it's just not been properly used, or it's never been corrupted. Even if they fake Protestant race, sometimes it can actually be the type of thing that's not formal enough to corrupt the virtue of faith. But Pius IX says you can't have the reasonable salvation covenant. What he means by that is you can't have the same kind of hope for someone's salvation that's a Protestant who dies outside the visible structure of the church that you would have for somebody who's dying there and the priest just gave him last rites. That's what they're really saying. So, does that answer the question?
So there's hope.
Yeah, but not reasonable hope in the sense of we have the same kind of hope we do for a Catholic man who was living his Catholic faith. Yes.
Paul, you mentioned a couple of times last night about the charismatic renewal and the charismatic gifts and that sort of thing. Can a layperson not be gifted with those charismatic gifts?
Oh, yeah, there are.
Healing and that sort of thing?
Yeah, they are, but they're extremely rare, authentic cases of it. I mean, I know of authentic cases. I know of a girl who's 13 who actually has the ability to discern spirits. So it's authentic. I mean, it's real because she can walk into a room and tell you what's there.
Okay.
And it's not fake because I know because I've booted things out. But
Well, now,
Not that I use it all the time.
do the laity, by virtue of their baptism and gifts given at baptism, can they not, someone out through the sermon and prayer, not release a spirit from a person?
Yes, they can in the sense that they can pray for the other individual to be done. What I'm saying is they shouldn't do formal, or they shouldn't do prayers of liberation over people, and they shouldn't impose hands. But they have obligations, like for instance, if your wife is possessed, which most guys would probably say she probably is. No, I'm just kidding. But anyway, if you find that someone in your family is, you have obligations to pray for them, and you should be praying for them, and that will significantly help. In fact, in very many cases, like if the wife becomes possessed or the husband becomes possessed, you get the spouse praying for them, and those prayers are really efficacious because of the marital contract. Yes.
In cases of addiction, is that a possession all the time, or?
Not all the time, because there's a physiological foundation basis for it. There's a threefold component. There's the physiological, which is the underlying thing, and then there is the psychological side, because you develop habits in relationship to the addiction, and then there can be a demonic side. Sometimes the demonic stuff can actually drive it, and the person really doesn't have the habit fully. So I have had cases of people who come in with addictions, and I'll exercise them, and in one case, the addiction's broken, they don't have cravings, they don't have any desire for it, they don't have anything, nothing. But,
what helps is
well, the body adjusts itself to the operations of the soul. So what you have to do is they have to change their habits, and in the process of that, they will actually change. The cravings will begin to just develop. There's a whole science behind it. Obviously, it has to do with receptors and a particular molecule that triggers the receptor and all that, and that begins to. So, and then in fact, they do have a new procedure. It's not that new, it's about 5-6 years old, where they put the person under general anesthesia and for heroin addiction, and they can give them this drug that will strip all of the heroin and all the stuff from the receptors, and so the person's cravings are gone. But when they come out, so they don't have the cravings, but they still have the habits. So about 30% or 25% of the people return back to it because of the habits. So that's why there's these different components. But sometimes a person, it looks like they have an addiction, but it's not an addiction. It's actually something demonically driven, but not in all cases. Yes?
What are binding prayers, and when you pray them, how long are spirits bound? How long do they stay?
It depends. Okay. A binding prayer is just, Spirit of X, I bind you in the name of, and then there's a thing that is, the copies are up here. People can email me if they ran out of copies to get the actual binding prayers, but it's a prayer which actually binds the demons. It depends on a particular case. In some cases, the binding is permanent and all it takes is once. Other times, if it's something that's habitual and it's been around for a while, it'll only have a temporary effect. Sometimes, if the person isn't holy enough, or if the influence is strong, the binding prayer won't have much of an effect until the person does enough of them or does enough things in order to get holy enough, in order to have enough authority to bind the demons. Because it's really with possession and obsession and all these things, it's all about authority. So, because that's what the demons understand. If the person has a specific amount of authority, then it actually has a greater effect. And this is one of the things that exorcists, at least in my experience, will find. When you're first starting out in this, you ain't got a whole lot of authority. You get beat around a lot. But as you do more and more and more exorcisms, it's kind of like climbing a ladder. You get more and more authority. And it's not just based on knowledge. You get more authority, and so you're actually more efficacious. But not always. And sometimes some exorcists, just by virtue of some grace that God gave to them, or some particular aspect of them and their priesthood has a correlation to the particular weakness of a demon. And so as a result, one priest who, will be far more efficacious with one individual who might take another priest a long time to get rid of them. So this is one of the reasons why sometimes if it's going on for a while, the priest will actually take the person to another exorcist, so you can try and see what you're seeing. If there's no difference, then it may not be that. But it's all about authority. So, but the point is that it binds them. It's usually a temporary effect, but it's one of those things that it's like anything else. You just keep doing it, and over the course of time, eventually it has a permanent effect, and they don't. And each binding is actually, if it's done in the proper form, is also a form of self-exorcism. So it's actually, it's just a matter of time before they, it takes a while for some demons to get the message. Others say, okay, I'm out of here.
And if I first you say, may God bind the evil spirit of sloth or whatever you're trying to get rid of, or you say, I bind.
It's just spirit of X or spirit of sloth. I bind you in the name of Jesus, because the name of Jesus itself has a certain force. That's why Protestants can boot people out, because just the name itself has a certain coercive force, and speaking it just has a certain coercive force. I bind you in the name of Jesus by the power of precious blood, and there's a whole things that you can add to it. If you're a priest, by the power of the priesthood, if you have faculties, by the authority of the church, which is a big boost, by the way. And I command you to go through the cross, receive your sentence, and not to bother so-and-so anymore, in the name of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So that's basically it. Yes?
Yes, those binding prayers that you have in English can be translated to Spanish, or
Yeah.
any specific ones in Spanish.
No, it's the same formula. They just do it in Spanish. There's also formulation actually in Latin, which is done. It's the same thing in Latin. So, although the formulation in Latin is almost always for priests, I mean, there's the extortatio sacerdotis meis is in there as a, and it's usually not lifted out for the sake of lay people. Once in a while, lay people will actually use it in Latin because they have Latin is good enough. So, but no, yeah, it's the same formula. You might be able to find that Spanish formulation on. There's a few Spanish websites that have some of that information, and you might be able to find it. But you have to be careful, because I've seen some of the formulations of those prayers that are not good. So some of that stuff that's out there about spiritual warfare, you have to be careful with, because it's not real knowledgeable, or it's just put up because someone said put this up, or it's done by a priest who's not that knowledgeable about it. Yes?
Abuses to the Eucharist. In some schools they have open communion in Catholic schools, and also some schools they just have walk through Jesus. You know, the coaches stand in the middle of giving out the Eucharist as the kids are going to lunch. No prayers, no nothing.
Whoa, that's interesting. I haven't heard of that one.
Yes, exactly.
There's always something new, you know. Although, like St. Paul says, there's nothing new under the sun. Everything is always a form of something else. So,
Does it open it up to...
yeah, sacrilege.
Yeah,
Sacrilege does.
towards the Eucharist.
Yeah, it does. It opens it up. Any type of sacrilege, any sin, and any natural disorder can open people up. Doesn't always. It doesn't always. In fact, in most cases, it doesn't. It's just in some cases it does. Yes.
You said my mind was going to expound a little bit more in situations of rape and not rape sports, but things that probably make it the things you laid out earlier.
Yeah, it's the rape causes the disassociation. It's the disassociation that causes it. Also, there's that. That's the thing that opens the person up on the side of the woman, because of the fact that this is happening on her side. But then, you know, when I told you, you know, if you make, if you speak bad words, they're going to become possessed. And not always. I mean, it's not like you speak a bad word, all you see this demon floating off. It's not like that kind of thing. But if you make use of a sinful use of an object, the object itself can become possessed. Well, that's basically what happens. Because of the nature of the act of rape and molestation, it's making ill use of something, and therefore it opens that thing up to being influenced, whether it's a child or a woman or a man or whatever the case. You see that commonly among boys who are molested. They very often have obsession problems, possession, and a kid who became possessed because he's molested by a priest. I know a woman who became possessed because of the fact that she was violating her marital debt with her husband with the priest. And of course, the demon, after she became possessed, let the priest know about it. But the point is making when you make ill use of something, you can actually open the thing up to being harmed and to becoming a demonic influence. And so that's what really happens. So it's the twofold thing with women: the disassociation and then the ill use. So, okay. You have to understand. The Council of Orange states that God gives everybody sufficient grace to be saved. Everybody that's ever been born gets sufficient grace to be saved. Doesn't mean everybody is saved, obviously. So that means even the Buddhists in Tibet get sufficient grace to be saved. But the problem is that most people that aren't part of the Catholic religion, this is one reason why I got to get them in, are going to have a hard time getting into heaven. So that's why our obligation is to get them into heaven. And again, they're not saved by virtue of their religion, they're saved by virtue of the Catholic Church. The second thing is that their religions will have elements that are true, but they also have elements that are false. And there's this principle, which is something that's being systematically denied today, and it's a serious, serious problem. It's called the pseudo-Dionysian principle of the integral good. And its technical phraseology is an evil is from any, or a good is from an integral cause, defect from anything whatsoever. It basically means, for example, if I give alms to somebody, but I do it in front of everybody so that everyone looks at how good I am, and so I do it for reasons of pride, it makes that giving alms morally bad. Right? Okay. Well, it's the same thing with the religion. A single defect renders the religion false and unpleasing to God. Doesn't mean that the people in it can't be, but that's because they can be in a state of grace, etc. It just means the religion itself is not. And by virtue of the fact that it's false, the only religion that can be saved is the one that's true. And so that means all people that are saved by virtue of the Catholic religion. So they're not saved by virtue of the fact that they believe in Muhammad. They're not, if they are saved. They're not saved because they believe they're going to go to nirvana. They're saved by virtue of the cooperation that they do give with the grace that's given them. And it doesn't necessarily come on their deathbed either. So, but that's the basic gist. Does that answer the question? Okay. Yes?
What is formal heresy?
It means that the person, it's the requirements for mortal sin. They fully understand what the church teaching is, and yet in their will they reject it obstinately. They hold on to it. Now, not that they reject what they think necessarily, but they, in the sense of if someone doesn't properly understand the Catholic faith, then there's not full consent, and so the formal heresy doesn't occur. But whereas if they know, yes, the Catholic Church teaches that Christ is present in the Eucharist, and I'm just not going to believe that, I just refuse to believe that, I know that's what they teach, I know what it means, I'm not going to believe it, and they're obstinate about it, that's formal heresy. Which means probably a lot of Protestants probably don't commit formal heresy. But I could be wrong, I don't know. It's, that's the type of thing that God would actually know. Okay. Okay. Yes. Not exercised, but abortion is one of the commonest causes of obsession in women. And I would be willing to bet, I just can't imagine doing that with any length of time without becoming driving influences to get against it. In fact, I've always thought, if I was a bishop, one of the things I would do is I would assign a priest to go and exercise the local abortion clinic once a week. I'd be willing to bet you each other, But, anyway.
What do you think about that? Talking about abortion, I've done this in the past. I'll bring less salt and just put it all along the sidewalk around the building.
Yeah. That you can do that. Yeah.
You referred to it also a couple times today.
Yeah.
Are there particular promises that Mary gave in that Evangelization are important for the spiritual warfare?
Well, there's some things that are said that are a bit jarring, like Rome will lose the faith and come and seek the Antichrist. Yeah. Lost of that. So, so when they were holding on, to the third secret of Fatima, I'm like, what are they holding on to? It can't get any worse than that, can it? So Our Lady said at Lost of that Rome will lose the faith and come and seek the Antichrist. So I'm like, okay. So why are they holding on to the third secret of Fatima? How much worse can it get? There's an unknown apparition, which the Church has given formal approval to, but which nobody hardly knows anything about, and which is even more secret than Fatima, and that is the division at the Tre Fontane in Rome. There was a guy named Bruno who was becoming an anti-Catholic, anti-Marian, and Our Lady converted him on the spot and told him she chronicled what was going to happen in the church after that. And there is some indication it has some type of connection to Fatima, because of the fact that on the 33rd anniversary of it in 1980, there was about 4,000 or 5,000 people present at the place in which it occurred. Tre Fontane, in case you get to Tre Fontane, that's the place where St. Paul's hand hit 3 times in the Faust, which incidentally 40 years ago stopped producing water for the first time since they had bounced. But, which I think is another sign that the age of the Gentiles has come to an end, the prophecy of Christ has been fulfilled, but I don't want to get into all that. The point is that they think it has some connection to Fatima because the 5,000 people actually saw the miracle of the sun that occurred at Fatima that were there, and they actually have it on tape. I'm like, why can't we get to see that? But anyway, so that's one of the ones that people don't know a whole lot about. But anyway, the point is that Our Lady just basically was saying, things are getting bad. She said at that stage that the clergy becomes cesspools of impurity. I mean, we're talking 177 years ago. So this is a serious problem. So.
Is that inevitable that the church is going to come back? That probably that we.
No, it's because people didn't do what they were supposed to do. People didn't do prayer and fasting. People didn't pray the rosary. People didn't communicate with me.
But wait, I mean, she said that Rome would become the seat of the.
Rome will lose the faith and become the seat of the Antichrist.
So we, as the laity, we're help here.
Oh, that doesn't mean. Wait a minute. That doesn't mean there won't be a pope and that he won't go to church.
Okay.
It just means that we're going to have problems. I mean, okay, let's back up. What most people don't realize is the prophecy in Daniel that the abomination of desolation will take its seat up in the temple does not refer to the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. That's just flawed. Theology is a failure to understand, and that's why the Protestants don't get it. They're all supporting the Jews to build the temple so the Antichrist will come, so that Christ will be forced to come back, right? It's like, that's real pride. But the problem is that the temple does not refer to the Jewish temple, it refers to the Catholic Church now, after Christ came and established the Catholic religion. So that means that abomination of desolation will take place in the Catholic Church. And so I think that when our Lady said, Rome will lose the faith in the seat of the Antichrist, it actually refers to the abomination of desolation. It's just that it's converged to prophecies. But I don't want to get too much into the prophecy stuff because that stuff is so speculative and you can go on forever about it. Yes? You mean the Orthodox churches and the Catholic Church needs to reunite? Is that what you mean? Yeah. Yeah, maybe it's just reading the signs of the times. I mean, things are getting bad. You know, the other thing is, too, that most people don't realize is all grace comes in the Lord by means of the Catholic Church. All of it. So any Protestant that has merit graces ultimately comes to the Catholic Church. Why? Because there's only one Savior in the Catholic Church, and this is the body of Christ. That's simple. But the thing to keep in mind is that, so that being the case, it means that because all grace comes in the world by means of the Catholic Church, what's that telling us about what's going on in the church? I mean, look at the world. It's a disaster. And it's spiraling down. I mean, not that there's not good people out there that aren't part of the church and such, but the point is that it's gone bad because we've gone bad. I mean, that's why if you want to start this, if you want to get the elections straightened out in this country, we'll get hold of you. That's the way to do it. So anyway, I don't know what he knows. There's certain things he knows. My own suspicion is too is well, anyway. So I just think that I just don't know what he knows. I'm sure he knows a lot of stuff I don't know. Okay, and we have to cut it off there. If you'll kneel, I'll give you a blessing, and then immediately after that, I'll bless the sacramentals. Benedictio Dei omnipotentis, Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, super et semper. Amen.